Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you are tuning in to listen. My name is Anthony Scala, and this is the second episode of Techs of the Roundtable. This week, I am joined by my friends Alex Neff and Chad Collier. I will give them here a second to introduce themselves. Alex, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, no problem. Hey, everybody. My name is Alex Neff. I am Senior Director of Information Security and Compliance for a company called Faro Health. We serve biotech companies and life sciences. On the side, I also teach at Arizona State University. I've built out their cloud computing program. Nice to meet you all.
Awesome. Thanks, Alex. And Chad, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Chad Collier, and I have been a CISO and a CIO for around 20 years, and in the last year have started my own consulting practice around security, AI, and cloud.
Awesome. Yeah, it's great to have you both on the pod this week. We have some really interesting topics that we're going to be going over that I'm really excited to get your take on. Kicking it off right off the bat with the CVE database. So in a dramatic turn of events, the US government has extended funding for the Common Vulnerabilities and Exposures Program, preventing a sudden shutdown. After announcing that it would not renew its contract with MITRE, longtime operator of the CVE database, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency reversed course at the last moment, securing temporary funding. The uncertainty surrounding CVE's future prompted board members to establish a nonprofit, the CVE Foundation, aimed at sustaining the program independently from government contracts. While this move addresses concerns about the stability and neutrality, questions remain about the long-term funding and oversight. The decision has already shaken confidence in the CVE, with some international agencies and vendors signaling interest in alternative standards. MITRE, meanwhile, remains involved but acknowledges the challenges ahead. Will the CVE Foundation be able to redefine the program's future? What does this turmoil mean for cybersecurity?
Well, I could definitely say that it's going to be very hard to manage vulnerabilities when nobody's actually detecting them and or communicating them,
might present
and
some
analyzing
challenges.
them.
Yeah, that's a major concern. Organizations regularly use the CVE database to understand what components of their infrastructure are vulnerable, how they need to prioritize vulnerability management, and how they can overall maintain the security of their systems. So a little shakeup here could have really significant impacts on just overall enterprise security. Chad, you had something really interesting on this point. What were you saying around that again?
Well, I don't see this as a setback. I actually see this as a good thing. Get the government out of it. It was probably a case where they needed government funding officially when this started 20 years ago. But with all the antivirus companies, security companies that make a fortune in revenue off of this, I mean, there's no reason why they should not be funding this. You know, politics aside, one way or the other, I mean, the reason it was probably cut to begin with, they probably didn't understand the impact of what they were doing, just cut it as a line item and saw it in the news and then reinstated funding, as you've seen this as a pattern over and over with all these cuts. And here we are. And I think it's, the gauntlet is out to these security companies to pony up the cash and start funding it themselves. They're the ones that are making the money off of it. I say that, I mean, without, mentioning the obvious positive impact that the CVE database has on all of us and protecting all of us. But at the end of the day, why is it the American government? Why isn't it the European Union? Why isn't it China that's putting this money into it? So I can understand the cut. I mean, what I don't understand is the tactic and the way they pulled it off. I mean, why couldn't they just coordinate it, work with the security companies, create that foundation that got created within 24 hours and set that funding up in a more intelligent way where you don't have all this chaos. You don't have the impact to the stock and these companies. which, all of us holding that stock in our 401ks and our personal investment accounts, we all feel that. So, that's my perspective on it. But I really don't think this is going to have any major impact. I think everything you see in the news is about the potential impact, but I don't think that potential impact's ever going to play out.
Yeah, I think that this is one of those areas that is just too important for it to fall. And that I agree with you there. I don't think that the actual work being performed or the maintenance of the CVE database would falter because the private organizations or enterprises would step in, especially the security companies. And I think, honestly, yeah, they should. Now, with the current move to the CVE Foundation, the nonprofit, that is pulling it kind of away from enterprise, pulling it away from government a little bit further. Now, do you think that it is better that it be a nonprofit, or do you think that this should actually be a dedicated division of set up by an actual organization? Like, should this be run by a single organization, or should it stand alone as its own nonprofit?
It should definitely stand alone. I mean, the moment you have one company which owns something like this, then they can put their thumb on the scale. I mean, there's so many companies that depend on CVE for the services they provide. I mean, you take pretty much any security company, and they are reporting some level of CVE. If you look at Wiz, just got bought by Google for 30-something billion dollars. Imagine if they didn't have the CVE database. Imagine they are the only ones who have the CVE database, and they could charge others for it. That would definitely kind of mix up the market in a way that I don't think would be fair for competition. And ultimately, the more fair things are and the more open this is, then the more of a chance we have things like open source projects, which can leverage CVE and provide value. So I think the more open, the better. And hopefully it can stay open in that way. I also do worry that there's going to be some level of loss when it shifts from, MITRE managed government funded to private. There's going to be a gap. No transition is smooth. So even that alone is going to be an interesting dynamic to this whole situation.
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting to see how they handle the change there for sure. And I agree with you. I can just imagine Microsoft takes over the CVE program, the CVE database, and all of a sudden Microsoft doesn't have any vulnerabilities anymore. I could totally see that happening.
Well, until that's not really something Microsoft can do. I mean, a hacker is going to get into their system and show everybody there's vulnerabilities. Just because you say you don't have them within a week.
Exactly.
Just because that could happen. Yeah, just because it can happen doesn't mean it's not going to. Because corporations have a tendency to be looking at their next quarter of their budget, kind of like how the government's doing right now. They're looking at the next quarter, right? If we can reduce everything this next quarter, then our budget's better now. Damn the consequences. And I think companies, and putting this in the hands of corporations, even if there are bad consequences on the other end, they may make the bad choice because somebody says we need cuts.
Yep, exactly. And that is really what we've been seeing with exactly as you're saying, Alex, the government is doing currently. And we really need the CVE database to live out essentially on an island because of its importance, because of its criticality. It needs to be funded, maintained, managed, and just consistently separated out and excluded from these kind of political debates or these potential cuts. It really needs to be established as a piece of critical infrastructure at this point. I feel like.
Yeah, full agreement here.
The CVE is also related to the NVD, which is the National Vulnerabilities Database, which is run by NIST. And so you have to ask the question, is that next? And should NVD pulled into a common foundation that runs both of them? Because right now, I mean, with the funding of the government stopping for CVE, but it's still funding the NVD, you've got this weird world in between. So I'd imagine, I mean, my preference would be both of those, along with a database that tracks all the virus signatures all put into one place, because right now they're in 3 different locations.
Hey, that's a really good point. There is a little bit of a decentralization currently between these critical pieces of information. Centralizing it under one roof would bring a lot of value and just streamline a lot of vulnerability management procedures.
You also have to wonder if taking the politics out of it is a good thing, because right now the U.S. gets to decide kind of what these things do, um, and it takes out the world as a whole to some extent. And a nonprofit, maybe it can be a little bit more decentralized in that way, to where everybody can kind of have a say. I mean,
Yep.
in this utopia of having a nonprofit run this perfectly and happily, everybody working together, you figure there might be a little more opportunity there for collaboration.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I wanted to also take this conversation and turn it a little bit, because I have been changing some of the way that my thought process, I've been changing my thought process a bit around vulnerability management, and it felt like a perfect slot in here. Over the last few years, we've really seen an increase in the overall sophistication of cyber attacks, specifically around vulnerability chaining. And this is the compromise or the exploitation of vulnerabilities that may be even lower on the criticality scale, have a lower CVSS score. But when you chain them together, they can create additional access or additional avenues into an environment. I've been adjusting my thought process recently to focus vulnerability management procedures to primarily on the known exploited vulnerabilities database, then bringing in criticality after that. What do you guys think of that?
Well, I've seen this in the news the last 2 weeks in relation to the loss of funding for the CVE, but the I don't think that's a good idea personally, because I think everything should be out there. Um, Maybe there's a different classification system, but as you can see, in the last several months, a lot of these big waves of attacks on like service accounts, the Chinese espionage, are based on really old CVEs. And so, where do you draw that line? I mean, there are tens of thousands of old service points that go back to, and that have vulnerabilities going back to 2010. It's like, where do you cut that line off, and why should you cut the line off? I mean, why does it even make any difference? I mean, from a technical perspective, we've our computer systems can they could check a vulnerability database going back to 1900 if there was a vulnerability that went back that far. There isn't, of course. So why even make that distinguishation? That's what I don't understand.
Oh yeah,
I
I
mean, do you
think
guys
more
understand why
so
that is?
the line on where to stop like the vulnerability management process. Is that what you're asking about?
Yeah, yeah. Like, why? I mean, what's the harm in keeping it all of it alive, and instead of just having this focus on the known vulnerabilities? Um, because, like you said, to your point, I mean, a lot of times it's a, a, a low critical vulnerability that might be very difficult to exploit, but if that is chained together with different activities, that becomes something that's highly critical.
Yeah, no, I think it's more of approaching vulnerability management, looking at the known exploited vulnerabilities as a forefront for that vulnerability management, not excluding the actual criticality or severity of any vulnerability through its CVSS score. So, like, your tens, your nines and eights, you're still patching those, absolutely, but you're what is baked into your vulnerability management procedure is also reviewing the known exploited vulnerabilities and having a priority focus or a resource focus on the vulnerabilities that are known to have already been exploited in the wild, as opposed to going after maybe that 6.5 or 7.0 that is super hard to exploit or requires internal network access or requires authenticated access that hasn't been exploited in the wild yet. So it's adjusting just slightly while you're still covering the high severity vulnerabilities, but you're taking a more intensive and assigning more resources towards the vulnerabilities in your environment that have already been seen in the wild?
I mean, that's the big selling point of platforms like Wiz, right? They'll go through and they'll look at what's publicly accessible, and that gives a higher score. They'll look at what's been exploited in the wild, that gets a higher score. They'll try to look at the chain of where things are within your environment to decide what should be scored what. And I think you are kind of pinpointing a big gap in what CVSS provides, and that is that it has no context. It's giving you, this is what this thing can do individually. It doesn't go beyond that. And to operationalize that, you have to have some context in your own environment. You have to be able to apply that context when you have these vulnerabilities discovered. And if you don't do that, then you're doing yourself a disservice. And tools are, they picked up on that gap and they're trying to fill it. And without that, trying to operationalize vulnerability management can be very difficult because just trying to tackle everything at once usually isn't an option. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I think most places these days don't really have unlimited resources. And so being able to focus those in those areas where you have the most threat is great, but you still have to have visibility into everything in order to do that.
Yeah,
What I don't
absolutely.
understand is what I don't understand is that's exactly what every vulnerability management program does. I mean, I've run them for years, and anything below a certain threshold, unfortunately, especially because I'm working with CISOs in the federal government, each month as you review your vulnerability list, those just get put aside anyways. And I've never focused on the low value ones because they're probably never going to be exploited. So, and I've never run a program where I've had unlimited resources, and I don't know of many companies that do.
No, yeah, absolutely. Well, and that's exactly what I'm trying to target here as well, which I know a lot of the vulnerability management solutions do as well, which is, well, in my prior consulting and with a lot of the organizations I've worked with, their vulnerability management policy sets certain guidelines for based off of CVSS severity. It's kind of a really standard vulnerability management policy. It's like 8 and above, you have 30 days to remediate, or maybe 2 weeks to remediate. 6 and above, there's 30 days, and then 5 and above is 90 days, and then 5 and or 4.9 and below, it's like, not worried about it. And that is generally based off of resource availability and capacity to perform that vulnerability management. Where I think that needs to adjust, and what we're seeing pivot in the industry as well, is a move to still hitting those high severity CVSS scores, but altering that a little bit to prioritize some of the maybe less severe vulnerabilities for some of the vulnerabilities that have already seen exploitation, that are already representing that active threat to the environment, because maybe a POC is out there, or or we're actually seeing attacks utilizing or exploiting the specific vulnerabilities.
And I'd say that's where strategy comes in. I mean, ultimately, you have to prioritize the highs to begin with. If it's a heavy lift and the high really isn't a high in your environment, then you modify your internal ranking, your own internal score, and then you deprioritize it. And I think with strategy, you can get the most impact. And ideally, you take care of everything. But when you eventually hit that wall of resourcing, then you have to make add that additional step and layer in there to analyze what you have instead of just take care of it. And sometimes peel it back, deprioritize it, kick the can down the road. Just the reality of things.
The back burner. It's the bane of all vulnerability management programs' existence. All right, well, sounds good. Let's go ahead and move on to our next topic here, which is pretty interesting. So, a new whistleblower report alleges that the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, may have accessed sensitive labor data from the National Labor Relations Board under questionable circumstances. According to the whistleblower, an experienced DevSecOps architect, DOGE engineers obtained unrestricted access to the NLRB's internal systems, evaded security logging, and exfiltrated large amounts of confidential information, including union organizing details, legal case records, and proprietary business data. Within minutes after DOGE accessed the NLRB's systems, someone with an IP address in Russia started trying to log in, according to the whistleblower's disclosure. The attempts were near real time and utilizing one of the newly created DOGE accounts. Security experts interviewed by NPR compared DOGE's actions to tactics used by cybercriminals or state-sponsored hackers, raising concerns about the integrity of federal labor investigations. Some big points here that I really wanted to call out. DOGE representatives gained owner-level permissions on the Azure tenant within NLRB. Logging on several critical systems and monitoring systems were disabled. 10 gigabytes of data was exfiltrated. And then we had the attempted Russian-based authentications utilizing DOGE accounts. And it was reported that those were also, with those attempted authentications, were utilizing the correct credentials for those DOGE accounts, but were blocked based on the region that the authentication was coming from. From a security perspective, what are the concerns here, and why is disabling logging such a significant concern?
Well, I mean, there's so much to unpack in this because there's the espionage angle. There is the authorization that DOGE received or didn't receive to do this type of work. The obvious, logging. I mean, I think we just all know, why would logging be disabled? You're trying to cover tracks
Cardinal
for
rule.
somebody. Yeah, a cardinal rule. In fact, it violates NIST 853 standards for that department. I mean, so you're all right there, in a direct violation of security policy which governs DOGE's activities within that department. The other things though that seem very fishy. First of all, I mean, of course, Russia and Chinese and North Korean know who these DOGE employees are. Very easy for them to get the username for an Azure account. So, I mean, that's no surprise. It's, how they got the credentials is more alarming. But two things that stick out. First of all, Russian state-sponsored hackers are not going to be coming in through Russia. I mean, so why would they do that? And they're also going to know that there's two-factor authentication on it. If somebody within DOGE gave the credential to somebody, they'd also say, well, it's not going to really work because there's two-factor. And unless you're able to intercept that token, it's a worthless activity. So my question right there is like, is this just something, to create noise in the media about this? Was this real? Because they seem like pretty unsophisticated hackers that would be doing this. And it would point to me that, I mean, if I was China and I wanted everybody to be convinced that Russia was doing this, I would VPN into Russia and attempt to log in. So I know everybody points to Russia and the alleged ties that part of the Republican Party have to Russian intelligence that you hear oftentimes in the media. This just seems more like a lot of smoke to me, because there's no way any hacker of any quality would do that. I mean, come in through, why wouldn't they not just VPN through the United States and not, that detection would not go off? Now, the logging thing is interesting, though, because that points to somebody inside. But I wonder if DOGE has done this all over the place and it just didn't get reported. There wasn't a whistleblower for it. As they blow through these systems they're going through, creates a lot of controversy. They don't want people knowing what they're doing in the system, and that's very apparent. So have they turned the logging off? All the times they've gone and done this. So that would be my observations.
Yeah, the logging is a big piece there, because that is such a cardinal rule of security as a whole. You log everything, and disabling the auditing trail, it is a major concern. And counter to everything that I've learned up until this point in my cyber career. Now, I agree with you to an extent there, Chad. It doesn't make sense why these authentications would come from Russia. I completely agree. Any hacker worth their salt is going to be utilizing a VPN, is not going to be routing through known malicious territories that most organizations have blocked at this point. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. And maybe that is extra noise or red herring. But also the permissions on this tenant were a big concern for me as well. DOGE is acting primarily as an auditor of government efficiency, of government agencies, to try to make things more efficient, at least as their stated purpose. Why would they need owner level permissions? They're an auditing. They should only need read only permissions.
And I want to speak towards that exactly, because I look at this all through a different lens, and that is that I think a lot of this is just purposeful negligence. Ultimately, you turn off the logs because you don't want to see people, or you want people to see that you're just doing stuff just to do stuff. You're just messing around. You don't really know what you're doing. You want ownership admin access because you get access to everything. You don't have to actually understand the quagmire that is Azure permissions. I don't blame them for that one. It makes life easier, but on a system that's as important as this one, it would absolutely terrify me to give anybody that level of access. You have these people who likely have very little access or very little experience doing real work, in the real world. They're college grads, and you're throwing them at a system, say, go dig at stuff. And these guys don't understand security. They don't really understand logging other than they're told to disable logging. They probably have a playbook somewhere that says go disable logging before you just start to dig and tear stuff apart, because we don't want people to know that you don't know what you're doing. As much as I, wish that people who are 22 or 19, who have no real world experience can go in and tear apart Azure and turn it into something, tear apart databases to find all this government waste. It's just not realistic. Like, I don't think that these people are ever going to do these things in ways that we would find acceptable. Like, this definitely will not hit NIST 853 protocol. This will barely hit SOC 2 protocol. Because they don't even understand what those things are. Like, these people with that level of experience have never had to deal with it. They've never had to understand the nuance that is security working in these environments. So I see it as purposeful negligence. Like, these people purposefully don't have experience, because that actually gives them a level of defense. It's like, well, I didn't know. I didn't realize what I was doing was wrong. And, Russia, China, whoever's hitting it, if this person is logging in from their laptop, which they've been browsing porn on, they have every compromise in the book already on their workstation. Is it really surprising that people are having access to their passwords and stuff? Well, not whatsoever, because these people probably don't have that level of care necessary. And I see this through that lens. Like, is it malicious in a way, but not from a hacker perspective? It's more just malicious from bull in a china shop perspective.
Yeah.
That's a great point.
100%.
Yeah. And, they would need owner access. I mean, if all we know is what we hear in the news. I'm a little bit of a news junkie, so I read this on a daily basis. And you hear these stories of them hooking up AI systems to government systems to do analysis. You would need owner access. Well, you wouldn't need owner access exactly, but I could see them just making it really easy on themselves. Give me owner access so I don't have to keep, like you said, in the Azure quagmire of permissions, which we all love and hate. You don't want to have to keep going back to a source. Give me more permissions. Give me more permissions. Just give me everything at once. I'll hook up my AI engine and I'll do my bit. And I mean, to your point, turning off logging to cover your incompetence is more plausible than them just turning it off because they're going to allow a Russian agent to come in and do something and they don't want anybody to see it. The mystery for me, though, remains, because I think what you said is plausible, is how'd they get the credential? And I would point to, it's one of these young guys out of college. It's probably got the credential on their phone. Did their phone get hacked and they were able to take that? Or was the credential purposefully given to somebody? Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of possibility, but if a credential is purposely given to somebody, the person would say, "Hey, it's not going to work because there's two-factor authentication." And if they really wanted somebody to get in, they would have gone to Entra ID and given an MFA exception for that for that specific credential right there, and that did not happen. So it sounds more plausible that somehow that credential got leaked. I mean, anybody, you know, there are thousands of government employees that are spied upon by foreign intelligence services looking for passwords. So it's very plausible that somebody infiltrated a phone, infiltrated a computer. They're not using government computers; they're using their own computers. It doesn't have the same safety standards. It's not a privileged access machine, so it's somehow a foreign government or a hacking group got a hold of that credential, and they don't know if two factors out or not. They're just going to try it. And they tried it, it failed, they learned their lesson and moved on.
Yeah, it on the point of the credentials, I could totally see this being a compromised system of one of the DOGE employees, essentially, that is, because of exactly that. They're not using government-owned systems. They're not using they're not using these controlled privileged access systems. But on the point of the credentials, just get reader level permissions on the tenant. That's a role. That's a role that is available. Why does DOGE need the capability to write and change data? That just doesn't make sense. You can have reader on the tenant level and see everything that you could see with the owner permissions. But am I
Not
wrong
not
there?
not the quagmire that is Azure permissions. If you have owner, you can grant yourself access to things,
Mm-hmm.
and there are certain resources within Azure that ownership does not actually grant you access to. You have to specifically grant yourself access, and that's specifically storage. So databases, storage accounts, and honestly, these guys are probably trying to dig through databases with AI. So they probably want owner to be able to quickly grant themselves access to whatever they need access to be able to do what they're trying to do. So should this all be pinpoint? Definitely. Was it? No. But this is a lot easier, right? I mean, if somebody wanted to just run in and do something as fast as possible, I agree. Ownership would be the right thing to do. Wasn't this circumstance?
Yeah, exactly. Well, and to the same point of the bull in a china shop, they're moving quickly and they're also covering up their tracks due to this incompetence. I wanted to hit on your point there, Alex, where these guys that are working on this, they're it's a young team. Now I get it. I'm pretty young, and I like to think that I've developed some skill sets. But for these guys that have come out of college, they've only been maybe a year or two in the workforce. If they're running primarily off of the education that they gained in college and everything like that, not actually working in an enterprise environment, working in these large infrastructures with these large permissions and permission controls, access control lists, like all of these other cybersecurity factors that filter in here, there is a level of incompetence that is at display here, because just fundamentally breaking cybersecurity foundations, cybersecurity principles to move fast, to break things, to get this work done, it is putting a lot at risk for the sake of speed. And you can definitely tell that the people that are actually doing this work, that are pulling all this data, okay, they might have some technical skills, but those are not grounded in years of technical experience in large enterprise environments where they are actually having to maintain these infrastructures, secure these infrastructures. And it's really scary to think that that kind of talent is being utilized on our government systems with some really sensitive information. The other piece there also is the 10 gigs exfiltrated. Chad, you had mentioned, like, I wonder now if they're just doing this everywhere. They're going into all of these government agencies.
It's reported in the news. I mean, if you can believe what the news is saying, this is what they're doing, department after department after department. It's not a different pattern. I mean, in any of these departments, a whistleblower could have popped out and done the same thing, and probably, I mean, apart from the Russian login thing, which they probably got an owner permissions. I mean, they're not security people. We're security people. So, we say we characterize this as incompetence, but they characterize it as efficiency because they're not security. They don't care. They don't understand why that's a violation of a standard of least permission. In fact, when I was their age and I ran and managed networks, I always had global owner access, super admin access, because I always felt like I didn't want to have to go back to an admin and grab them the permissions. I wanted to be able to go anywhere in my estate, do anything I wanted at any time. And I'm sure that's the mentality of these guys. And, and they're probably right. If their order is to go in there as quickly as possible, get this job done, with Father Elon giving him the marching orders, of course that's what they're going to do. That's not even a surprise to me. I mean, that's exactly, if I was Elon Musk, I would have told my guys to do the same thing. Get super admin access, go in there, get what you need done, because these guys are working under a pressured timeline because the days of DOGE are numbered. It's widely unpopular at any given time. This whole thing could be shut off. So they're just marching through these programs as quickly as possible to try to get this all done before, the people revolt and demand a head.
And that actually makes me think, and that's a great point, because if it's days are numbered, collecting data should be the number one priority, because that means that they can continue in the background. Because if they have that 10 gigs of data, and that is the one database which has information about immigrants in the labor system or something like that, then they can continue to pump that into an AI engine 1,000 times to see if it gives them information after they've already been, the plug has been pulled on their access to the systems. So maybe that's kind of their end game.
Yeah, and if they are doing this across all of the agencies that they're encountering or reviewing, turning off logging, exfiltrating this data, where's this data going? Where are this 10 gigs? Are they doing it in other? If they're doing it in other agencies, I mean, I would imagine that there are hundreds of gigs, terabytes of data that are being moved around government systems or out of government systems currently. Where's that stored? What's the security of that data store? And where is that going to live post DOGE, post administration? What is going to happen with that data, and what are the controls around it to protect U.S. citizens and all of us that there might be data around about us or our businesses in those data sets?
That's the scary thing. That's why it's controversial. That's why people are angry. There is no clear authorization for DOGE. There is no department that was set up. That's got to be set up by an act of Congress. So what you have is, DOGE is a phantom. It's a concept that was thrown out there to cover what Elon Musk and team is doing, but it's not an official government agency. If you're not an official government agency, you don't have the authorization to go in and do any of this.
The lack of authorization is the lack of apparent vetting, the lack of apparent skill sets, the lack of security controls, the lack of logging. This just seems like a complete cybersecurity nightmare. So I'm sorry, listeners, if you don't have a good night's rest after this pod, but it's the reality of the situation of where we're at right now. The current approach to security from DOGE is putting all of us and businesses at risk just based on their data security standards and their or lack thereof, and their lack of adherence to established standards in the security realm. Now, I feel like we could dive in and talk about all of this for days, but I do want us to be able to move on. We have some other really, really good topics for the show today. Any last comments on the NLRB DOGE whistleblower report or DOGE's lack there of security concerns or security mindset?
We could go on for hours. But we should move on.
You can go on for hours. And what do you guys say?
Yeah, so we're going to go ahead and move on here. But yeah, very interesting stuff. Definitely recommend listeners do your own research, dig into it yourself, and come to your own conclusions. But from three security professionals here today, we're concerned. Now, the next topic I'm really excited about. This was actually your idea, Alex. So I'm going to let you introduce this one and get us rolling.
Alrighty, so next we're talking about certifications. Are they for you? I have about 70 of them. If you ask me to list them all off, I would not be able to. I've gotten certifications without even realizing it, and then later I got something in the mail. Some people hand them out like candy. Other people make you work really hard for them. I've kind of lived certifications throughout my life, and they've had various levels of usefulness. Sometimes they've been worthless, and other times they've been great help. And as somebody who teaches college, and I have lots of students who are trying to get into the workforce, I'd say that certifications are extremely important. They're not going to get you, the ability to walk straight into a job, but they show that you have a level of drive. It's kind of like a college degree. Just because you got a college degree doesn't mean you know what you studied. It just means that you have the drive to show that you're willing to study it for 4 years. A certification is kind of similar. You're willing to study something and go get that certification. And that means that you are one step above, if I don't know you whatsoever, a person who doesn't have that certification because they don't have that drive. As you get later in your career, at least from my perspective, certifications start to matter less because you have more of a body of experience to lean on. Ultimately, certifications don't really convey experience. They don't convey ability. They just convey the ability to study and to regurgitate that in a test. So I think as time goes by, certifications, they're still going to stop you from getting some jobs if you don't have them. Like, is that the CISSP I see in the background over there? I think I have mine right there. That's kind of what really let my cyber career take off. And I think a lot of like mid to high level cyber jobs require it. So there's certain certification that you kind of need to play the game. But a lot of other certifications, I don't think have a whole lot of value. It just depends on where you're at in your career and what you're trying to accomplish.
Completely agree. It is definitely going to be situational, but they are very important. And I do think that there is a period of time where the lower end certs start to fall off, but the higher end or the more intensive certifications like CISSP, CISM, those kind of level of certifications, those start to play a bigger role. And then once you really get deeper into your career, even then, I still feel like these higher level certs, CISSP, CISM, CCISO, CRISC, all of these, like those still play an important role, but maybe not as important as kind of the middle section of your career when you're still trying to grind or build up to your a total objective for your career.
I guess I have an interesting anecdote in that.
Oh, sorry, Alex.
No, I want to embrace controversy. What do you got, Chad?
I'll just flat out say 90% of them are garbage. And I have a reason for saying that is because, like I mentor people in cloud and security, younger people that are trying to get into business and everything. And, sometimes the people I work with will, they don't want to listen to my advice at all. And they'll be like, I'm going to go get a Coursera certification. And I'm like, okay, well, that's going to be worthless for you, probably. Maybe there's somebody out there that wants that Coursera certification, and it certainly shows that you did something.
I only hire people. People who have Coursera. I mean, I top of the list.
Top of the list. So, give me a second to explain this because I think it's nuanced. To Anthony's point and to your point, there are certain standard table stakes certification for executive positions like the CISM, the CISP. I've got mine. I've had mine a long time. It greatly helped my career, or helped my career get to the next level. Did it really improve anything that I was doing? I think it really taught me the value of policy, risk, governance, compliance. Because when younger in my career, I didn't understand it as well as I started going up the ladder And the expectation as a technology executive or security executive is, well, those are your table stakes. You have to know that. You can't become an executive unless you know those. So those are great certifications, and they are the lingua franca of our industry. I mean, like the CISP allowed me to speak the same language as another CISO. And, if, persons from another country, we still have this common way to understand things. So I think those are very important. Now, the other thing that's happened, I'm a veteran in the industry. Back in the wild days, before 2000 and 2010, when I was a software engineer and I was getting into network management, security management, things were wild. You did not have the GRC pressure that you have today. You didn't have NIST. You didn't have, CIS was, coming around. You had some ISO, but nobody paid attention to it unless you were a really big regulated company. And I worked at some big regulated companies, so that's why I was introduced to ISO. But, for the most part, especially in software, I mean, you're sort of like badge of honor was how creative you could be in software. Your badge of honor as a network engineer was solving really hard problems in creative ways, getting the technology to do something that it probably wasn't designed to. The number of weekends I spent with an engineering team banging our head against the wall, and Sunday night we had designed something that worked, and we get to go back to senior management and be like, we solved your problem. Did you test it for vulnerabilities? Is it compliant with anything? Well, we were too tired to answer those questions. And then you forget about it on Monday and you move on. And then, but with the rise and the conformity of that GRC pushes on the industry, and especially around cloud estates. I mean, every cloud provider has to follow the CSA matrix for design. And to get FedRAMP compliant, you have to have the same set of features and standards that every other person has. So it's created this conformity, and this is where I'm going with certifications. So because AWS, GCP, and Azure, we love Azure here, we're Azure guys, they are roughly identical from a full set implementation. I mean, to the point where, it's not like FedRAMP compliance has FedRAMP for Azure, FedRAMP for GCP, FedRAMP for AWS. It has FedRAMP. They have to fit into that box, not the other way around, the way it worked before. Microsoft used to pride itself on its new and cool stuff that the other guys didn't do, but that's gone these days. Now everybody has to comply with that same framework. And where I'm going with certifications is certification the old day, like I got the the Microsoft Certified Engineer and variants of that. But that didn't really tell you to do it a certain way. It just sort of said, can you do control flow in your C# code, or you could do, write Java in a certain way. But now, I mean, you look at the way certifications stack up in AWS, Azure. I'm not as familiar with the GCP ones. I mean, the certification tracks are almost identical too. And it leads a developer down a path that makes them understand exactly how you implement code in a cloud estate in order for it to be compliant. If you're promoting code today in Azure, there's not a lot of creativity you can do with it. You've got your DevOps tools, which are mostly generic, and you've got your app servers, your function calls, your queues, and they're identical across the board. And if you go down the certification track, you're going to learn how to work with those features. So I think that is very valuable there. But what I'm saying is you get tied into one vendor. If you're going to do them, I mean, mostly everybody does the Azure track, or they'll do the GCP track, or they will do the AWS track. They don't go do DevOps for Azure and then development for AWS and then cloud solutions architecture for GCP. It's like you sort of get stuck with one vendor as you go through it. I have some AWS and I have some Azure because I like multi-cloud, and I like to just understand maybe there are the nuances of them. I don't see a lot of nuances. Somebody's going to hate me for saying that, and I'm fine. I'll take that bullet. But so I see certifications in that sense to be very valuable. So that the big picture ones, the ones that are tied to the cloud vendors, because that's the world we live in. And then I think also there's a third set of them that are lower level, more entry level certifications that I help beginners speak a common language, and I think that's important. And so people love to hate this certification, but the CEH, Certified Ethical Hacker, which a lot of people that have that think they're a hacker, but what they really have is sort of a common language that they can speak to other people that also have that certification, and also work on red teams and work in a SOC. So I think there's value to those. Now, the Coursera version of hacking, I don't know how valuable that is. With that said, Coursera is probably going to sue me, but I'm bringing that out just because I've been working with somebody that loves those certifications, and I keep asking them. I was like, "Do you love them because they're easy? Because they're not really going to align you with a vendor." And today, I mean, so many. I'll say maybe the vast majority of employers today, they want you aligned with the cloud. So having a cloud cert tied to a vendor, that helps people, and it helps people work within the estate of the employer. So I think that's highly valuable. But that's it. I don't want to get sued.
So
That's it.
Can't say anymore.
Okay, so let me recap here. The vendor specific certs that you're talking about for like cloud, for like Azure, GCP, AWS, those are really solid. They're good certs, but you really are going to want to stay on one track there and develop that out. The more okay, I struggle to even call Coursera just tech agnostic, because it does fall in that category. But I mean, Coursera just needs to make better certs, quite honestly. What do you think of CompTIA, though? CompTIA, A+, Net+, Sec+, the trifecta has been a staple of getting new aspiring practitioners into.
That's an example of that third pod I said. Those are important, like the CEH, the A+, the CompTIA. I think those are great, and I think that demonstrates entry level knowledge needed for really any company that's running help desk. So I think that's important.
Yeah, and I have a lot of students who want to go and get the A+, and at that point, it's like, hey guys, if you have 4 years of college experience, you've been working on tech for long enough that A+ is cool, but maybe you can try to level up and get one of those mid-level certs. And kind of building on what Chad said, same shameless plug. I use civic study guides for certification. So this is data engineer right here, for all the classes that I built, because I believe that the more you can make things real world in college, the better. So I've built 4 cloud classes. Every single one of them goes after an AWS certification, because the students are working off of AWS. And at the end, if they really want to push themselves to the next level, they can study, use that study guide, and they can go get that certification. And is this going to make them the ability to be a data engineer in the real world? Probably not. But if I was hiring somebody entry level and they have some real world experience in the form of labs, and they've gone out and got the certification, I'd hire that person over somebody without that every day of the week. And I think it just shows that hunger. Like, you have to show the hunger for learning. You have to show the aptitude to try to actually study these things and get those certifications. And that will, put enough feathers in your cap to be more likely to be the one who's chosen. And the other thing I wanted to point out with Chad that you mentioned, and that is that when you're a security cloud engineer, you have to know multiple clouds. Like I also am AWS and Azure certified. I started off with one cloud, and when I realized that Azure is pretty much the same thing as AWS, just a different flavor, it made things a lot easier. Because at first I'm like, I don't know Azure. You go in there and it's like, oh well, this is exactly the same. They call it an instance over here, a virtual machine over there. It's a Lambda, Logic App. It's all the same stuff, just different flavor. You can tell they all just copy each other. And so in security, unfortunately, we have to know everything. We're not allowed to just know this one little thing over here. And having multi-cloud experience there is very valuable.
Yeah. Okay. So you had something in there that I really wanted to call out and also commend you on. Teaching towards certs in college courses. That is so great that you were doing that. I think that is super important because it enables your students to come out of the class with something actionable, an actual certificate that they can gain, that they just have to go take the test for, essentially, or put in a little bit extra legwork for. And that is going to help set them up much more than just going through that class, not getting the cert, maybe coming out with a degree. Having the degree and the cert is what is going to help them get that entry-level job. In IT, by the way, calling that out here as well. I know we're talking about a lot of cybersecurity, starting in IT. Always start in IT. I know that we talked about that last episode. But that also brings up another piece. Boot camps. What are your guys' view on boot camps?
I think it's great, but it is what it is.
Yeah, I mean, boot camps over COVID, if you remember, I mean, I think boot camps have always been around. I mean, but they gained a lot of stature. I remember over COVID, and I don't know why it happened over COVID, because a lot of people were starting to work remote. But I remember, just reading in the news, you could get $100,000 a year job after going through a 1-week boot camp, which I never believed that was possible. Or it might have been, there was a surge of tech hiring during COVID, and maybe there was a recreation of like the 1999 to 2000 era where anybody could get hired if you just knew how to operate a computer. Embarrassingly enough, that's how I got hired. I was an economist that was really badass at Excel, and it was the dot-com boom, and I was like, I could make way much more money working for a .NET startup. So I did, and I just jumped over, and I mean, I probably had 6 months worth of software development skills, and lo and behold, I got 30% more money than I was making as an economist for Ernst & Young, which was mind-blowing for me. Now, to come back to 2000, where people have gone through these boot camps, and you read all over the news, oh my God, people are getting hired all over the place with these things. But now you don't hear much about it anymore. They seem to have lost their cachet. But I can't simply believe that a 1-week or 2-week boot camp is going to teach you anything, because you cram through all these concepts really quickly. If you have no background in IT or software development, security, cloud, you're not going to be useful. It takes months and months, years and years. And going back to the point about the DOGE boys, it's like a 28-year-old, you just don't have the crazy depth of experience that you would need to know everything. Maybe you could learn one thing really well or two areas really well, but you're just not going to learn software development, cloud security, cybersecurity, because it takes a long time. It takes meaningful experiences to get that. Now, maybe if these guys every year in a boot camp manner moved through 1 year of cloud, 1 year of security, 1 year of software development, I could see that scenario preparing somebody to be, quite competent at that age. But a boot camp, no. Now, and there's a funny thing going on right now is, and we all know this, I'm sure there's going to be a podcast episode on this. It's vibe coding. That's making everybody into a guru now. You can go onto YouTube and there's a dozen vibe coding channels of people, and it's some alpha bro. And he's like, I know nothing about software engineering, and here I'm going to build a product and take it to Shark Tank or whatever. And it seems there have been a case where people have done that, and they are making millions of dollars a month off their product, and accolades. I mean, I wish I did that. So you sort of have a new phenomena where all of a sudden, very quickly, you can jump on this bandwagon and get that six-figure job. And I think we've all discussed this as an aside. That's not going to happen. It might happen for somebody, a few people, and they might make it and might get into the news. But, the latest and greatest way to get to the top. Vibe coding is not going to teach you what you need to work in security, cloud, IT ops, SecOps. In fact, it might just make you so sloppy that you're ineffective and you're horrible for those positions. Alex, say something.
Yeah. So you.
I have a lot to say, Chad, but I don't want to stomp on your game too hard.
Stop.
No,
Come
I
on,
mean,
stop.
Okay, stomp. I will. AI has changed everything. I mean, I believe that to be truly successful in this new AI-enabled world, you still have to have the foundations of whatever it is you're working on. Like if you don't understand how an app interconnects with other apps, you can tell vibe coding, you can throw it at ChatGPT or Claude or whatever all you want and have it do this, that, and the other thing. But if you want to build something that's real and something that will stand up to any level of load or have security, then you have to understand how it all works, because you have to go in there and tweak the levers and everything else.
Mm.
So I actually wonder what this is going to do to the market, because it's going to take all these people who are mid-level, who are only 28 years old, as you said, Chad. They have that one or two things they're really good at, but they have enough context to where they kind of understand everything a little bit, and they can use something like ChatGPT to help take that context and expand it to where they can do that much more and almost act like somebody who's a greater level than they are. And I worry that we're going to see so many people who are mid-level and senior level get so much of a productivity boost from these things. Like it's not going to be insane productivity boost. We're not going to see 10 times productivity boost. But if you see like 30 to 50% productivity boost for people, what's the need for entry level anymore? And when you don't have entry level people coming in, then where the workers come from? Because eventually you're going to need people to do stuff, and it's going to create this really weird dichotomy of the industry, to where we're not going to have boots in the ground again. And right now we have so many students who are waiting to get in the door. I feel bad because they're pumping out getting these degrees, and those who don't have the drive to get certifications and do all these other things, they're not going to be well equipped to actually get those positions, because unless you have the experience, you're not getting them, because there's consolidation happening right now due to productivity boosts. And it's just a really strange environment. I feel like every generation has a challenge, and this is the challenge that the generation currently has to try to get to the workforce.
No, I agree 100%. I think people have been
Yeah.
lied to, encouraged to go into these programs that are basically worthless. They're not going to get a job from it.
Yeah. Yeah.
My program's great, though. Just saying.
We again, vibe coding we could talk about at length, but I do also want us to save a little bit of it for, we are going to end up doing a podcast on vibe coding. What I will say though is I do agree. I think that vibe coding is not the solution. It's not like the start. You shouldn't start vibe coding and think that you can do that you can develop, think that you can take products to market, because I don't think that that's going to happen to the extent that I think people think it will. But I do see it, just like you were saying, Alex, as a productivity booster for those of us that are experienced, that are in these senior level, mid to senior level positions, in increasing the efficiency, because now it unlocks better, more efficient and faster development of scripts, development of whatever we need to better enable our role. Or I've used it for KQL queries, for going through seams, stuff like that. I still know what I'm doing, but not having to actually build the query from the ground up helps to just make the process a lot faster. Now, I want us to also kind of loop back here, putting a cap on vibe coding, because we're going to be having an episode on that. All right, so yeah, and just to recap really quickly here on certifications, they are important. If you're listening to this, you're trying to get into IT and cyber, get certified. They are important. Now, not all certs are made the same. There are certs that will do more for you than others, and there are certs that will be better for you at certain times in your career versus other times. So if you're senior level, you're not going after a basic cert. An IT manager isn't going to go for his A+. A cybersecurity director probably not going to go for their Sec Plus. probably going to be focused on CISSP, CISM, some of the bigger certs. And overall, make sure that the certs that you're going for, one, that they actually have a market for them. There is actually need for those certifications. Don't go after the lowest hanging fruit. And also make sure that the certs align with what you want to do and what the businesses are looking for, especially in terms of cloud technologies and aligning with a vendor or a cloud technology so that you can start developing in that direction. Now, I want to give Alex and Chad, you guys each a chance to toss in your final thoughts on certs prior to moving to the last topic of the day.
I can just throw out there that there's this resource called Security Certification Roadmap that's been built by somebody named Paul Jeremy. And if you look at it, it shows all of the cybersecurity certifications across the spectrum of different cybersecurity topics and areas. And that's a really good resource if you're somebody who is at pretty much any point in your career to kind of figure out which direction you can go. Because it's kind of like a tree, and you can kind of figure out which branches you want to climb up when getting certifications to keep up leveling your career with certifications.
Great call out there, Alex. Yeah, definitely take a look. What was that name of the cybersecurity certification roadmap again? Or the creator?
It's called the Security Certification Roadmap, and it's published by Paul Jeremy.
Awesome. Thank you. And then Chad, any last thoughts on certs?
Yeah, I mean, you got to have them, and you got to have the right ones. And I think the conundrum for younger people is they just don't understand the complexity of the whole industry, and they get they hear the siren call. They're on a ship, they hear the siren call, they start heading towards those rocks. The most valuable information you can give to a younger person is get certified, but get the right certification that's going to actually be valuable to an employer. Or the other thing too is I have so many friends at ISACA, CSA, ISA, that will ask me, like, I mean, they're right out of college and they're like, I'm working on my CISP. And I feel horrible, but I'm like, that is a really dumb thing. I mean, you need 5 years experience minimal. They say that to you. And I mean, hard-headed people will be like, well, I'll just get it anyways. And then I'll get the 5 years and then it'll be something that's worth it. And like, well, that's some pretty bad advice in my opinion. But so, I mean, it's getting the right cert at the right time in your career. It's not fooling yourself into thinking that a cert is going to make you a master at somebody. That's another thing I hear too is, I hold a bunch of the expert certifications. Am I an expert? Well, I don't know. To one person, yes. To another person, no. Just because I have it, I don't want to fool myself into thinking I can rest on my laurels and that I demand some sort of respect because I have this. And I think that's something you see that's endemic with young people too. It's like, I have this cert, I'm a pro, I've got as much experience as you do. No, so again, it's being level-headed about it, your career. It's being smart enough and listening to the advice of people that are going to get you going in the right direction with those certs tied to that. So that's it.
Absolutely. It's a great point. And for those listening, Chad is one of the foremost Azure experts that I know. So, I appreciate the modesty there, but yes, no, you're an Azure expert. And so exactly that. Get it at the right time. And what you were saying about the CISSP too was just so funny because I've seen that as well. For those that don't know, the CISSP, you need the 5 years of experience, but you also have time to achieve the 5 years of experience after you pass the test. So you have 6 years after you pass the test to actually qualify for the actual certification. So if you've passed the test but don't have the experience, you are what's called an associate of ISC squared, which doesn't do almost anything for you as far as I've seen in the job market. It doesn't really help you out that much. And it's really the road of like most resistance to getting this cert. One of the main reasons behind the 5 years of experience requirement for CISSP is it is such a broad and intensive cert that with the 5 years, you're already coming in with 40 to 50% of the knowledge from your experience. So going into the CISSP without any of that, you are taking on a massive cert with none of that experience to back up that understanding. It's a much more difficult learning process. It's much more difficult to study and much more difficult to pass. All right. So with that, I did want to put a cap on our cert discussion. I have another topic that we could talk about.
I will say one last
days.
thing. One last thing.
Okay.
I will never hire somebody that has on the resume an aspiring CISP, because I see that all the time on people's LinkedIn profiles. So I get a resume that somebody, the aspiring CISP, and I'm just throw it. I don't want to hear that. You know, I think it discredits a person and makes them look sort of juvenile, but that's fine. That's just me. So I'll end it there.
So wait. Now we need to unpack that a little bit further. So why does that? What's the reasoning behind it that it just disqualifies someone for you?
It's not associate CISP. If somebody had an associate's, but they passed the exam, that's different. You know, they're waiting to catch up with that 5 years experience. I mean, that's for me actually sort of impressive. But it's just, you know, I meet a lot of people at these consortium groups, meetup groups that are trying to get into the business. A lot of times they're coming from different angles. You know, they're mid-career. And, you know, I know a guy that runs a cigar shop that wants to become a cybersecurity professional. And on his LinkedIn resume, he's got everything about the cigar shop. And then it just says, aspiring to get the CISP. And it's, well, I don't know. It just seems like you're boosting yourself up. You haven't demonstrated that you have those skills. I mean, could I put, I'm aspiring to be the president of the United States? Would that mean anything to you? Probably not. I mean, it would just make me look sort of like a buffoon. And for me, that's just my own personal inclination. I understand that people may want to say that because they're like, I'm a hard worker, I'm going in this direction, and this is where I want to go. But I mean, if you're putting aspiring to be a CISP in one, where that usually means you just don't have the experience, and I'm going to be able to see that right out the gate. So I mean, I guess if somebody had 20 years experience and they're putting it on there, I would think that through differently. But I usually don't see veterans doing that. I see it like these, people starting out in their career as if that's somehow going to get them a leg up or whatever. I mean, it'd be like me saying, I'm aspiring to have $10 million in the bank. Well, it's effectively meaningless. You know, it doesn't mean anything.
I think that distinction definitely pulls it apart, because I agree with you there. Is if there's someone that has no experience in the field, has no codification of skill sets, no nothing to really back them up, and they're trying to enter into the industry, and all that they have is aspiring CISP or aspiring this, that no, it doesn't play well, because exactly like you said, it doesn't demonstrate anything. You haven't done anything yet. Now, if they are deep into their IT and cyber career, and they have several other certifications that are codified, but they list on their resume, hey, this is the one I'm working on currently, or this is in progress, I feel like that plays a little bit differently, because you've already shown that you're in the industry, or that you have some of that experience. And that you've gotten certifications. So it's like, it's not as crazy of a jump. It's like, oh, you already have these other certs. Okay, you're working on this one. I have a fair degree of confidence, because of the other certs that you've already passed, that you're going to get this cert too. I think that's a big distinction there.
Fair enough.
And if you are trying to get into IT and cyber in this, don't put aspiring big cert, enter big cert here. Go and get the Sec Plus. Go and get some of the fundamental certs. Put those on your resume, and then once you get there and you're actually working on one of these bigger certs, you have a little bit more backing to put it on your resume that, hey, I'm working on this big cert, but I have all of these other foundational certs. So
absolutely.
All right, we're gonna go ahead and move forward off of certs. Yeah, no, it does. And it was a good point though. It was a good point. We had to unpack that. Our last topic for today, and this one is something that I'm pulling actually straight from my experience, and I'm really interested to hear your take on this, Alex and Chad, and that's around titles. Now, I'm speaking specifically in the IT and cyberspace. I'm sure that this could be applied in other areas. I'm sure it's not applicable in other areas. But through my career, I've heard consistently titles aren't important, or I don't care about titles. But then at the same time, I'm a hiring manager. I'm in conversations with executives when we're reviewing a potential candidate to hire. Time and grade is always a part of the discussion around how long they've been in a particular position. That particular position is summarized by the title, and that's what we're assessing. As well as I've been in situations. I'm a consultant currently, and I work with other companies to help guide their cybersecurity programs. I've essentially have done the work of a lot of risk mitigation work and a lot of stuff like that in the kind of vCISO sphere of what a virtual CISO would be doing for these organizations, but I hadn't held the title until recently, or until the last year or so. And I have been in meetings where I had a client really needing help and really needing guidance that asked, well, have you ever been a vCISO before? Are you a vCISO? And at that point, I'd already been doing the work, but I didn't have the title, and that I didn't end up getting to work with that client, work with that company to guide their security. So my question here is, which is it? We have on one hand people saying, hey, titles aren't important, but then I'm seeing titles being used in very important scenarios all across the board. Are titles important for your career, or are they not as important?
Yes. There's a lot to unpack on this one, because I think you're starting to get into like psychology a little bit, and just like the human condition to some extent. In my career, and a lot of my career, I've done the work of my supervisors, many a times with a title that is much lesser than theirs. And I've done both their work and my work, because I've had some lazy supervisors in my time. Does that mean that I was acting as that role? Yeah, it's what you make of it, right? And I think especially when you're interviewing and you're talking to others, how you carry yourself, your understanding of the subject matter, the way that you're positioning your language when talking with people, because that's a big thing about senior roles, is you have to understand how to level the way your speaking style, because based on your audience. I think these things have a tendency to go a really long way in interviews, or just your personal communications within your workday. But titles do make a big difference in some places. Like some places, if you don't have a title of director or higher, I'm not talking to you. You're not important enough. Why are you putting something on my schedule? Because I'm busy. You're some junior person who's just trying to take up my time. I've seen it both ways. I work at a startup right now. You think titles really matter at a startup? I do everything across the spectrum. I could be doing entry level work, one moment, and then doing high level strategic work the next. Does my title really matter then? Sure, senior director or CISO, whatever sounds cool. But ultimately, where I'm at in the startup, it's just getting work done. You just have to get stuff done regardless of what leveling it's at. And so I think it's a complicated thing to run into and to try to figure out. But the one piece of advice I'd give is always try to get the biggest title you can. Mostly because when somebody's looking at a resume, that's what they see. That what's on the paper is what they know of you until they start to talk with you. And then at that point, titles don't matter any longer, because you're going to have to show them you are what you are. You're going to have to convey with them. And so title inflation is something that could also work against you, because if you have CISO in your last gig, but you don't come off as somebody who has that level of experience, then that really could hurt you, because it's going to make it look like you're not being honest with people. And so it's a complicated one. All I could say is try to be true to yourself, try to understand your own limitations, try to understand, the general scope of what people believe something is, and be honest with yourself. Are you that? What can you do to get there? And, keep working at it, and eventually you will.
I don't disagree with you there. I think when it's internal to a company, that the title matters a lot less. But when you start the external activities, that's where it really comes into play. The job hunting, the business development, the conversation, business partnerships, and relationship building like that. That is where title comes more into a play. And when you're in this position where, okay, internally, because like I'm director of cybersecurity operations and vCISO for an IT company. Yesterday, I was on site at a client site doing help desk and desktop support. So it doesn't matter because the work just needs to get done. I completely agree with you, Alex. But it doesn't, because there is that importance of titles in that external sense. I don't know if it's a fair statement to say like because that titles aren't important, as I've heard from other people throughout my career, because there is still an importance to them, even if it's not important in the one scenario you're in. If there is an importance to something, it is always at that importance level, at least in my mind. But Chad, what do you think on this?
Man, I've got a really broad, observation and opinions about this, and I think it absolutely matters at the C level for CIO, CEO, and CISO, and I'll tell you why. The Enron crisis created Sarbanes-Oxley, which means executives are responsible for signing off on their security program, their financial program. And so right there, a CEO is reliant on a CISO or a CIO to certify something. And to get D&O insurance, which is directors and officers, that is for the C level primarily. And that is to ensure against that personal opinion that a CISO would be making, certifying the security is solid, compliant for that organization. And the further you get into public companies and the further you get into regulated public companies, the more and more that is important. Being a director at a Fortune 50 company, there's could be some variance there, but you get to CISO CIO, that has meaning, and they are not going to take somebody that does not have a background in GRC. Because if you've got a compliance obligation and you are a technical CISO or a technical CIO, you don't understand compliance the way they need you to in order for you to sign off and say the program is complete and it's done for the year. So when you get into the wild world of everything that's not a public company, let me walk that back a second. I would also include companies that are striving to go public, or there's a certain class of private companies because of they're regulated or they're in certain sensitive areas. You're still going to want an officer to sign off on that security program, that IT ops program for investments. For an investor comes in and they're going to want to say, like where you work, Alex, I mean, that you guys could blow up and then you're looking for big time investors. They're going to want somebody to come in and sign off that security program. And this also is becoming more and more important with cyber insurance, where you have to sign off. When I was a CISO and I had to sign off on the security program for cyber insurance, 10 years ago, it was nothing. It was a page. Do you have MFA? Yes. And a couple other things or whatever. Did you do encryption? Yes. Now, last year, the last time I did it, it was 5 pages long. And I didn't get sleep at night because going into the gray area and signing off on something that you may not have complete assurance that is done the right way. Like say, for example, we were a fast growing company. And so we went from 500 people to 4,000 people in 3 years. So my MDM program, which didn't exist before, antivirus is what I had on these endpoints. Cyber insurance was asking for EDR and MDM all of a sudden. Now, I had started that program. I had started the conversion over to a EDR system, but I was 90% done. But was I 90% done? You don't know. You don't always have the visibility into how complete anything is. And a lot of times I'll see people, they'll say, yeah, I have EDR. Well, I have EDR on 95%. But they're asking it, the question is a yes or no. So it's like, back to the point of like, in larger companies, when you go through this process and they're asking you, do you have this? You've got to be willing to say, Yes, I sign off that this is true. I get back my cybersecurity, and most importantly, I'm willing to take the legal risk. Black Hat 2023, I was sitting in a CISO forum when I think it was the SolarWinds CISO got arrested that morning, which was like, whoa, it was like a glum day at that meeting because, I mean, that happened very infrequently. And what you're seeing now is it happening, more frequently. And also what you're seeing is you've seen this a lot in the last couple of weeks, the DOJ going after companies for false claims acts, where if you sign a government contract, I see this in CMMC. There's a CMMC contractor that simply stated they had this program in place. It was only 90% complete. The CISO signed off on it. It's 100% complete. It wasn't. There was an incident, got investigated, and that company got fined for $4 million. And I don't think that CISO has a job today. So you see that. And so, yes, I mean, if you're working for a big public company and you're a SVP of IT and that CIO position's open, I mean, part of it is, are you willing to put your life on the line in a sense? I mean, are you willing to go to jail for that role, that title? I mean, you got to ask yourself. That's becoming more and more a thing as we move on. Now, to go on the other side of the coin, I've had the CIO title twice. One of them, it was a total joke. I've had a CTO title before. It was a total joke. It was a startup I was advising on, and they were like, "Can you come in and be our CTO?" I'm like, "Well, I don't know a lot about your product." And they just wanted somebody to front that, to go to business meetings with that title. Was I truly a CTO? No, I ended up, walking away from it because I have integrity and I don't like being in those situations. And I really don't like meeting people that come up and tell me I'm a CIO, I'm a CTO, I'm a CISO, and it's completely obvious that they don't do any of that. That it's just somehow they were a founder of the company, they gave themselves that title, or their friend was a founder, that friend gave them that title, or whatever. So, and then, to further unpack this, it's like, when I was a technical person, and I'm a technical person today, but for many years of my career, I wanted to be a CIO. I was a technical guy, and I got the title of CIO, but I wasn't for the first couple of years truly a CIO. I was still doing technical work. And I would say to myself, well, I do all the things a CIO does, blah, 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 blah. Well, no, I wasn't, because CIO doesn't do technical work. They don't. They have a GRC focus. They've got an IT ops focus. They've got a focus making deals with other companies. They represent the company's security and operations program in sales and deals they're making, but they're not a technical person. So it's like when I finally became a true CIO, and the same thing applies for a CISO too. I hear a million people say, I'm so technical. Why aren't I the CISO? Well, because a CISO is not a technical role. I would hate to have a CISO that didn't have a technical background. We all know there are CISOs and CIOs out there that don't have technical backgrounds. Personally, that, I feel the vomit in my throat when I meet that individual, but I get it. It happens, and there's value to those people, those roles. But if you're that technical guy and you haven't made that leap yet, well, I don't know. I mean, you should probably rethink that. I mean, do you really deserve the CIO title? Do you really deserve the CISO title? Does your company even understand what those roles are? Because I see a lot of companies, and this happened to me too. It's like, I've been here 10 years. Don't I deserve the title now? Sure. But the company wasn't really big enough and ready enough to actually have the segmentation of roles yet. They were like, here's the title, but you're still doing technical work. Here's the CISO title, but you're still doing technical work. So I like to think of it in those terms.
Doesn't change, but the title does.
Yes. So titles matter, but also titles don't matter at all if you're not really doing that role. So that's my opinion.
No, and you kind of highlighted two things here as well, because Alex, you had mentioned title inflation and kind of inflating your own title, which I think we can all agree that that is not a way to go about that, because that's going to be sniffed out immediately, and you're really showing that your lack of integrity there. But Chad, you are also highlighting an area where, okay, you work in a small business, you end up getting that CIO title or CISO title, but you're still doing the technical work, you're still performing all of that, you're not actually doing the true CIO CISO work. Well, that's exactly that. Titles are important on that external face. And you go job hunting, maybe you find, because they see, hey, for this company, he was CISO for the last 5 years, the last 10 years. Okay, you get another CISO role. Well, now you're kind of in a same spot, just a little bit less intentional of inflating your titles, because the title was given to you and you did the work, but you were never in a position where you actually had to do the actual requirements of a CIO, of a CISO for a larger company or for a different company that when you jump to, you may not have that skill set and it may not set you up for success.
Well, I think you touch on something important there, and that is that a title at one place is much different than a title at another place. I mean, if you're a CISO of Walmart and you're CISO of my company, the stature is a little bit different. One has 50 employees, one has probably like hundreds of thousands. Like it's a completely different role. I, in my role, do as much management work as somebody probably does at like a manager or director level at something like Walmart, if that. Just because of the nature of the size of industry. It's going to depend on the type of company it is. If you're working for a company that manages warehouses, they could have 100,000 employees, but only have 10 tech workers. It's different all across the board. And that's where title plus experience, the vertical you work in, all that taken together really does kind of build your persona as to what it is you are in your career. One other thing I'd like to add is that the resume honestly only means so much. Like a lot of these days, especially when you get to mid to higher level roles, it's networking. You have to know people to get into places. You have to have the right experience and skill set and know the right people to get there. You can't have just, knowing somebody, at least hopefully you aren't just getting nepotismed into some place, but you have to have both. You have to have the right experience. Like for me, I'm really experienced in cloud security, managing cloud security programs. I have some hybrid, mostly software companies. That's my sweet spot. So if I'm looking for work out there, God forbid, no time soon, my startup continues to do great, but that's my sweet spot. That's where I should focus. And when you see people going outside of that sweet spot, you see them applying for any role anywhere that's somewhat loosely related. It's kind of a fool's errand. Like you have to take and try to, build out your story. Like what do you bring to the world in terms of what you offer? It's not just title. Title's a part of it, but that's just one of the many, components of what it is that you're offering as a commodity in this environment.
Yeah, that's a good point. And to go back to what you said, Anthony, and what you were just saying, if you're a CISO or CIO at a company, but you're really not playing the role, you just have the title. You're a technical person, you're a technical security person, but you're not doing anything compliance. You're not running a governance program, a risk program, or anything, which I think the vast majority of companies don't do these days, or have never done these days. And then you're trying to get another job as a CISO or a CIO, and that other job's role is a traditional CISO or a traditional CIO. They're going to see right through that. They're not going to be like, oh, you've got the title, come on board. They're going to look at what you do and they're going to be like, you aren't a CIO. I mean, but you could go to another company where the CIO is considered technical, and that company will hire you and say, okay, this guy's the best candidate for this job. So I just think it depends on the context. And I think as you go further up the ladder, especially in the public companies, you're not going to see a lot of technical CIOs or technical CISOs. You're going to see people, those jobs are almost purely executive.
Yeah, you really, really get there in the career where you get to that split in the road. Do you go full send technical, or do you go the more management executive route that has a lot less of that? But I think what we can all agree on here is don't hire a CISO that has no technical in their background, please. And that it just is not a recipe for success. And to wrap this up as well, I think what we've really come to here, and I want to get your last thoughts here as well. Titles are important. Don't let someone tell you that titles are not important, but also don't think that titles are the only thing that is important. Alex, Chad, any closing remarks before we wrap this pod up?
Yeah, titles are not important.
Titles
You said
are
you wouldn't let me do it. No, I. Titles definitely important, and just to kind of wrap up in general, having passion and drive will always trump certifications. It will always trump title. Like if you're trying to do something, having passion and drive, going out and building a strong network, you do these things, you'll find a lot more success. Just trying to do things passively, applying on LinkedIn to easy apply, you're not going to get that job. I'm sorry. Everybody getting that job actually may have applied via LinkedIn Easy Apply, but they talked to somebody at the company already. Like it's not a way of getting somewhere. So you have to be very active, very passionate, and really get out there, because if you don't, then you will be left behind.
We are going to spend an entire topic in a future pod just talking about passion and drive, because it is that important. I couldn't agree more. Chad?
And networking. No, I've enjoyed everything that's been said today, and I thank you guys for inviting me on the show, and I look forward to further conversations.
Yeah, no, thank you guys so much. I really appreciate your time and experience and expertise coming on the show today. Looking forward to seeing what you guys do in your future with your careers. I know we got some projects that we're working on currently that are looking really awesome. So really glad that you guys were able to make it today, and I appreciate your contributions. To our listeners, thank you for tuning in. This has been a fun journey to this point, and we're going to keep building this out and keep improving. So I hope that everyone has a great rest of their day, and tune in next week for the next episode of the pod. Thanks.
Thank you, guys.